On August 2nd, 216 BCE, the heart of the Roman Republic stopped beating for a moment. The dust of southern Italy carried the cries of men who would never see their city again. Under the merciless sun near a quiet village named Cannae, the pride of Rome, its legions, its sons, was devoured in a single day of horror. 70,000 Romans gone. A massacre so vast that even the gods must have turned away. It should have been the end of Rome. But somehow it was. Because this is not just the story of a defeat, it's the story of how a nation stood at the edge of extinction and refused to fall. The war had already been raging for 2 years. The Second Punic War, Rome's bitter struggle against the cunning Carthaginian general, Hannibal Barca. A man so daring that he had crossed the Alps with elephants and mercenaries to bring war straight to Rome's doorstep. He had already humiliated the Romans twice, once at the Trebia River and again at Lake Trasimene. Thousands had died, entire armies had vanished, and the Roman people were beginning to lose faith in their own invincibility. In Rome itself, anger simmered like molten metal. The Senate halls echoed with shouts and blame. Citizens whispered that the Republic had grown cowardly, hiding behind the cautious tactics of Quintus Fabius Maximus, the man they mockingly called the delayer. His strategy of avoiding battle and starving Hannibal's army had saved lives, yes, but it had also wounded Roman pride. The people wanted blood. They wanted glory. They wanted revenge. And so the Republic turned to 2 new consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paullus, the careful veteran, and Gaius Terentius Varro, the ambitious populist. They were as different as night and day. Paullus had seen the horrors of war and knew Hannibal was no ordinary foe. Varro, on the other hand, was driven by arrogance and applause. He promised the people victory, not strategy. Rome listened to him, because Rome wanted to believe it was still unbeatable. The Senate raised one of the largest armies in Roman history, nearly 80,000 men, 8 legions strong. Fathers, sons, farmers, merchants, all marching south with the confidence of men who believed the gods were on their side. Their mission was simple: find Hannibal, destroy him, end the war. But Hannibal had already chosen the place where he would destroy them. The plains near Cannae, flat, open, and treacherous. He had recently seized the Roman grain depot there, deliberately provoking the Republic into attacking him. His army was smaller, about 50,000 men, a strange alliance of Africans, Spaniards, and Gauls. They spoke different tongues, wore different armor, but shared one common cause: the destruction of Rome. And on that fateful morning, as the first light crept across the dust, Hannibal prepared his masterpiece. The air was dry, the wind strong, whipping dust into the faces of the approaching Romans. It was no accident. Hannibal had chosen his position so that the wind would blind his enemies, make them choke, make them angry. His army stood in an unusual formation, a curved crescent, its center bulging toward the Roman lines. In the middle, his weakest troops, the Gauls and Spaniards, stood exposed. On either flank waited his elite African infantry, silent and ready. And far out on the wings, his cavalry, fierce Iberians on one side, lightning-fast Numidians on the other. Across the field, Varro's legions formed up. Dense, deep, and brimming with confidence. Instead of spreading wide, they packed together, a human wall meant to crush everything in front of it. It was the Roman way. Simple, brutal, and predictable. The horns sounded. Tens of thousands of men began to move. The ground shook. The Roman infantry advanced, shields gleaming, sandals kicking up a storm of dust. They crashed into Hannibal's thin center, and it began to bend. The Gauls and Spaniards fell back step by step, just as Hannibal had told them to. It looked like a retreat, and the Romans roared in triumph. But it was a trap. Hannibal and his brother Mago fought at the center, keeping the line steady as it curved inward. The crescent became a bowl, then a pocket, and the Romans kept pushing deeper, believing victory was at hand. They didn't see that the walls of their own destruction were closing in around them. On the flanks, Hannibal's cavalry struck. Hasdrubal, his brilliant commander, led the charge on the left. The clash of hooves and metal echoed across the plain. Within minutes, the Roman cavalry was broken and fleeing. But Hasdrubal didn't chase. He wheeled his horsemen around the battlefield, racing behind the Roman lines to strike their allies on the other side. Now both Roman cavalry wings were gone, and the legions in the center were alone. Then came the moment Hannibal had been waiting for. He raised his hand, his signal. The African infantry on both sides turned inward, attacking the Romans from the flanks. From the rear, Hasdrubal's cavalry thundered in, sealing the trap completely. The Roman army was surrounded. At first there was confusion, then panic. Men screamed orders that no one could hear. The dust grew thicker, the heat unbearable. Shoulder to shoulder, crushed in the press of their own formation, many couldn't even lift their swords. It was not a battle anymore. It was slaughter. Livy would later write that the ground itself seemed to drink the blood of Rome. Men begged for death. Some, too wounded to fight, knelt and offered their throats to the enemy's blades. Others dug their faces into the dirt, suffocating themselves to escape the horror. The killing lasted for hours, long after the sun had begun to fall. When it finally ended, the field of Cannae was silent except for the crows. 70,000 Romans lay dead. The greatest army the Republic had ever raised had been annihilated. Lucius Aemilius Paulus, the cautious consul, was among the slain. Varro, the man who promised victory, escaped with only a handful of men. When the news reached Rome, the city broke. There wasn't a family untouched by grief. Mothers tore their hair in the streets. Fathers stood in silence, unable to speak. Livy wrote that the entire city mourned as one body, its heartbeat heavy with loss. In desperation, the Romans turned to the old gods for mercy. Ancient sources claim that, in horror and superstition, 2 couples were buried alive in the Forum, a sacrifice to appease divine wrath. Even for Rome, it was an act of pure despair. Meanwhile, in Hannibal's camp, the mood was triumph. The Carthaginian general had done the impossible. His victory was total. His commander Maharbal urged him to strike now, to march on Rome while the Republic still reeled. In 5 days, Maharbal said, you could be dining on the capital. But Hannibal refused. His army was exhausted, his supplies thin. He believed the psychological blow alone would finish Rome, that its allies would abandon it, that the Senate would beg for peace. For a brief moment, it seemed he was right. Cities across southern Italy defected to his side. Capua opened its gates. Even King Philip of Macedon pledged support. The Republic looked finished. But what happened next was something no general, no prophet could have foreseen. Rome refused to die. When Hannibal's envoys came offering peace, the Senate didn't even listen. They declared it a crime to utter the word peace. They would not ransom the prisoners Hannibal held, leaving thousands to rot in captivity. Instead, they raised new armies. They lowered the draft age, armed slaves and convicts, and sent them into the field. They even gathered the shattered survivors of Cannae and formed them into 2 legions, exiled to Sicily until they could redeem their honor. And so, from the ashes of Cannae, Rome began to rise again. No more reckless charges. No more blind pride. They adopted the very strategy they had once mocked, Fabius's war of patience. They would no longer fight Hannibal head-on. They would choke him slowly, city by city, ally by ally, until even his genius could no longer save him. Years later, that same resilience would lead them to Zama, to the final confrontation that would end the war, and with it, Carthage's dreams. Cannae remains, even now, one of the most studied battles in history. A masterpiece of tactics, a lesson in the art of destruction. But its truest lesson isn't about Hannibal's brilliance, it's about Rome's endurance. Because sometimes, a nation's greatest strength is not in victory, but in the courage to survive defeat. Cannae was Rome's darkest hour. But from that darkness, Rome found the fire that would build an empire. Cannae was Rome's 9/11. Want to know how they came back and crushed Hannibal at Zama? Hit *, subscribe *, turn on the bell and comment below. Which ancient battle should we cover next?